Good evening, everybody. I'm Susan Bowden. I'm with the Archaeological Conservancy. I'm the Digital Outreach Coordinator. I'd like to invite my speakers to rejoin us while I give you a quick introduction. First of all, thank you for joining us this evening for a lecture on the PaleoDigger and the archaeological investigations that are happening at our Barton Preserve in Maryland. Before we get started, I'd like to give a welcome to you. Now, if you're not new to us, bear with me. I want to make sure everybody knows who we are. So the Archaeological Conservancy is the only national nonprofit organization that identifies, acquires, and preserves the most significant archaeological sites in the United States. And we're right at about 600 sites preserved at this point, which is pretty amazing. We were established in 1980, and our preserves represent a broad array of time periods and cultures. Fascinating to learn about and know about. If you haven't seen it, we have a great website. The link is there, and I will be dropping that into the chat for you so you can take a look at that on your leisure time after the lecture is over. Tonight, if you have any questions for our presenters, please feel free to drop it into that Q&A section down at the bottom of your screen. That's the best way to know that your question is going to get to me. I'm facilitating on the back end on my own tonight, so bear with me. I'll get over to our Facebook group also. If you have questions, feel free to drop your questions in Facebook, and I'll get them over to our presenters. In the event that we have more questions than we have time, I'll be collecting questions, and we'll get answers for you via email at a later time. If you have any technical difficulties, we are live streaming. I'm checking it right now. Looks like it's going just fine, so you can pop over to our Facebook feed. And we are also recording, and that recording will be available tomorrow, sometime probably mid-afternoon. And so you can share with family and friends, or you can rewatch if you'd like to. So with that, that's my introduction, and I am very pleased to be joined tonight by one of my colleagues, Kelly Berliner. She is our Eastern Regional Director, and she is going to be introducing our speakers tonight. So Kelly, I'm handing it over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Susan, and thank you everyone for joining us tonight. I'm really excited to have these two archaeologists with us, and I'm also really excited that we're covering archaeology in Maryland, which is where our Eastern Regional Office is based. So I'm going to try to keep these introductions a little brief, but make sure we get the credit these guys deserve, but also just leave them enough time to get to the presentations. So first, I'd like to introduce Dr. Robert Wall. Bob completed his studies at Catholic University and has more than 40 years of experience in archaeology, covering the Northeast, the Great Lakes, and Mid-Atlantic regions. Since 1980, he's worked on survey and excavation projects in the Upper Potomac Valley of Maryland and West Virginia, and for a time was the Western Maryland Regional Archaeologist. His longest running work in that region is his work on the Barton site, which we'll hear more about shortly, where he has excavated to understand deposits dating from the contact period back through the Paleoindian period, with a particular focus on lithic and ceramic analysis. Importantly, much of this work has been done during field schools and state society field sessions, where both students and volunteers with the Archaeological Society of Maryland worked alongside Bob and had the chance to learn from him. So he's been a professor at Towson University since 1993, and in his career has been honored with both the Lifetime Achievement Award from the Mid-Atlantic Archaeological Conference and with the William B. Maury Award from the Archaeological Society of Maryland. So welcome, Bob. And next, I'd also like to introduce Dr. Zachary Singer. Zach is the state terrestrial archaeologist at the Maryland Historical Trust and actually was a student of Bob's back when he was in high school. He interned with him and studied the artifacts from the Barton site, so full circle. After doing that work, he went to the University of Maryland where he got his BA and then went to the University of Connecticut to complete his studies and earn his doctorate. And during this time was continuing his work on Paleoindian sites. Fortunately for us, he has returned to Maryland, where he's done research through a professorship at Towson, a position at Washington College, with the Lost Towns Project, with a research fellowship at the Maryland Archaeological Conservation Laboratory, and beyond, but now is in the position as the state archaeologist with the Maryland Historical Trust. So his primary interest is the Paleo-Indian period, you probably could have guessed, but also geophysics, lithic technologies, and more. And so just very briefly before handing it over to these guys, I wanted to just say one or two words about the Barton Preserve, which we'll learn about. The Conservancy acquired this property in 2000 to ensure its preservation and availability for research. And we're so grateful for all the help we had to acquire that site, particularly from Bob, as well as archaeologist Tyler Bastian, Richard Hughes, and others with the Maryland Historical Trust. Otherwise, this could have become part of the industrial park that's out there or topsoil mined, totally destroying the site and limiting what we could learn from it. So we're really grateful to see research going on at the site. And we're also very thankful for our numerous site stewards, including Duncan Smith, who farms the property, Matt Chartiger and Brent Nelson, who hunt that site, as well as Roy Brown and all the folks with the Western Maryland chapter of the Archaeological Society of Maryland, who not only have worked extensively on the site, but also help us keep an eye and ear out there to make sure this place is safe. So thank you guys for bearing with me. Welcome, Bob and Zach, and I'll hand it over to you, Bob.
Okay. All right, I'm going to share my screen here. Okay, here we are. This is the Barton site. This is about 30 acres in the preserve here. So you're looking at it from the north end. And this is where we've been working on and off for 30 years. This is just a little thing I put in the inset showing what the Barton site may have looked like 13,000 years ago. We kind of know this from our deep excavations, and we get into riverbed deposits, which is just below where the Clovis material is. So that's why I stuck this in here just to show you. This is where the site is in the floodplain of the Potomac River. Potomac River is little more than a large creek which runs along the tree line here. This is the north branch of the Potomac, and the site is right here between these two arrows. The Shriver Church, which is probably why they're here, why many of the people that lived here came, was because Shriver Church is located just up here. So it's a good lithic resource that they used throughout prehistory. This is what I mean about how small the Potomac is. So it's just, you can walk across it in the summer. So, but this is the Potomac River, north branch of the Potomac River. This shows an aerial shot of some of our excavations. Now this area, and I'll get to the other components in a second, but this is where we've done a lot of our deep testing. This is where the Clovis occupation was initially found. This is also the area where we excavated the latest component, which is the Susquehannock component. And I'll give you a few details on that in a second. We excavated here since 1993 with the permission of John Barton, who used to farm this area. And then the Conservancy bought it from John Barton. So I just wanted to acknowledge him. Okay, now this is thanks to Tim Horsley, who did the magnetometer survey of this entire field and basically showed us where everything is. I wish we had this 15 years before that, but you know, we did what we could do in our excavations, which you can see these little squares here, the white squares. Those are all our test excavations over the years. But this is the 30 acres. The fluted point comes from the surface here. In fact, this whole area has been surface collected forever. I'm going to go through a sequence of occupations, starting with the latest and working back to the paleo, and then Zach's going to take over and describe what we've done with the PaleoDigger. So Susquehannock community, it's not really a village, but it's a cluster of features with some smaller structures in this part of the site. This is the Kaiser village, which dates to the 1400s. And Mason Island villages are basically throughout this whole area. And I'm not sure we can call them villages, but we did see these rings, palisade trenches, I assume. You can see them here and further down the valley here, or the floodplain here. So that's Mason Island occupation, which predates the Kaiser village. And then I'm going to talk about this area as well, which is a T0 terrace, so it's a lower elevation. We have early and middle woodland settlement in there. So we pretty much have the whole thing. And this is occupations that are just below the plow zone. So we're looking at features that have been truncated by the plow, and then I'm going to talk about visualizing occupations after that. Okay, so starting with Susquehannock. This was a surprise to us in the 1990s. We started picking up this zoned and sized pottery, which we didn't expect to see. We do see it in other sites in the Upper Potomac, but didn't expect to find it at the Barton site. So this is Schultz phase, early Susquehannock pottery. These are the pipes that go with it, which are comparable to what we see in Schultz phase sites in South Central Pennsylvania. And these are just some of the tools that have been found, really well preserved: bone tools, awls, marginella shells. So we have marine shell here represented as well. Different types of ornaments, pendants. This is a whistle, more here. So there's a lot coming out of the Susquehannock component on the site, including this rarity of painted artifact. I only know of a few specimens in the East that have any paint on them like this. So this is a rare occurrence. Now this dates to the early 1600s, so you can understand maybe that's why it's so well preserved and wouldn't be in earlier components, but still is very unusual. These combs are typical of South Central Pennsylvania Schultz phase components, so this is all consistent with what we expect to see in Susquehannock sites. I'll talk about the trade beads in a second. These are just a couple examples. The star bead fits in the time frame from 1600 to about 1615, so it's consistent with the pottery that we found. These are a variety of contact period materials: brass and copper triangles, tinklers, gunflints. This is the star chevron bead here. So that is one of the identifying chronological elements for the Schultz component here. These tubular copper beads are identical to a couple we got from the Kaiser component, which are native copper, but you can't really tell the difference, looking at these. These are contact period, these are trade items, the others are native. And these are typical Susquehannock features. We have silo pits, we have deep pits like this. These are the deepest pit features we have on the site as part of the Susquehannock component. And the other thing is we expected to see longhouses. We haven't seen any. We tested several areas looking for longhouse patterns. We just don't see them anywhere in the Upper Potomac. Other sites as well. So they're probably here for a brief period of time, and they're not building longhouses. They're building more temporary structures, perhaps. But we didn't see any evidence at all of longhouses. We do see the silo pits. We see other things that are typical Susquehannock, but we don't see the longhouses at all on the site. These are this mapped area here, which is the same area I showed in the aerial view at the beginning at the top. These are silo pits that are Susquehannock. The problem with this part of the site is there's also Mason Island features everywhere. So the Susquehannock features tend to be intrusive to features that are already there that are part of the Mason Island component. Okay, so that's the Susquehannock component. So that's the latest component on the site. So the next one that we worked on is the Kaiser village, which dates to the mid-1400s. And it's defined again with the help of Tim Horsley's magnetometer survey. We see the palisade right here. Old aerial photographs, you could see like a donut shape here that marks the same location here, but that was the only indication of any kind of palisades on the Kaiser village. So this is an enhancement of the magnetometer survey data. And what we've done with the Kaiser component is we attempted to locate some houses inside the palisade. We found one initially in the 1990s here, and we found a complete house up here about 10 years later. This is the palisade trench, and these are the large posts on the inside of the palisade, which would be to your right, identified with these yellow arrows here. This is the trench itself. Not particularly deep, but this is a cross-section of the same trench here. This is the first house related to the Kaiser component that we came across. The unusual thing about this structure is, first of all, the posts are in a trench, which is unusual for this region, but also the posts seem to be paired. Not perfectly symmetrical, but they're associated pairs in the walls of the structures. And we found this in the other house as well. So it's kind of unusual to see that, but that's what we found in the 1990s when we first opened up the Kaiser area. This is the second Kaiser house. We followed out the complete house for this part of the site, and these are the paired posts again, marked by these roofing nails here. So they're not perfectly symmetrical, but they tend to occur in pairs, and you'll see in a second when I show you the whole house what these things look like. This is one wall of the structure here. This is an interior storage pit, which is cross-sectioned here. And we also see pits that are outside of the structure on this side of it. You can see fill episodes here. They appear to be lined with bark. So we found bark in the base of the pit, which is probably what they use for lining in the storage pit. So both internal and external storage features are what we have. This is the whole house. So these are the paired posts. Again, it's not perfectly paired like you see in like an Adena structure, but they seem to be maybe part of the architecture that they're using to build these houses. These are 5 to 6 meters across. This is a central hearth. And in this central area of the house, we also found a copper bead. Same type we see in the Susquehannock component, but native copper, which we had tested. Greg Latanzi at the New Jersey State Museum tested the Kaiser beads and found them to be native, sourced probably in New Jersey somewhere. These are some Kaiser artifacts. This is typical Kaiser pottery, shell tempered, cord marked. It tends to have this what we call pie crust or indented or impressed cord wrap stick impressions on the lip. Thickened areas like this. You also see lugs. That's typical Kaiser pottery. A pendant here out of the groundstone pendant here and a mini gorget. So these are the kinds of things that have come out of these Kaiser features. Lots of hide-working tools as well. Okay, so that's the Kaiser village here in the center. I want to talk a little bit about the Mason Island communities. These are a series of farmsteads or small villages, much smaller than the Kaiser village, that were set up in this area for about 300 years. That's the early, what we call early late woodland on the site, defined by page ceramics, which are limestone tempered. They have added rim strips, folded over lips. This is typical page ceramics that we see all across the site. This is the most common type of pottery we see on the site. Okay, now these are page features. Now, the page features are all over the site. We attempted to find a house pattern that relates to that Mason Island component. We found part of one here, and the base of the post have shims in them. So each one of these post holes has shims. We got half a structure here, which goes into the next unit. And when we tried to follow this out the next year, there was a Susquehannock trench which cut through the other part of the house. So we never really got the complete house like we have with the Kaiser component. These are just some examples of Mason Island features. We have fire-cracked rock hearths. We have just burn stains like this within this midden. And we have hearths like just burn surfaces here. And a lot of shallow middens or basin-shaped features are pretty typical what we find in the Mason Island component. And these are some of the tools we get from the Mason Island component. Lots of really good bone preservation, lots of bone tools, bone beads. The tubular turkey bone beads are one of the more common beads that we find, as well as the marginella beads, the shell beads, which are marine shell. Now the question about the Mason Island components is they're all over the place. And just about everywhere you put in a unit, you find some page ceramic. So it's long-term duration, 300 years probably or more. Whether these villages were just little farmsteads like this, or whether they were rings of houses within small palisades, it's hard to say. Because we haven't opened up enough area to really tell what these settlement patterns look like. But they are prevalent over the site for 300 years. So when you see these sequences here, like these smaller circles here, and these are all defined from the magnetometer survey. We don't see a sequence because the radiocarbon dating is not precise enough to really see which are the earliest and which are the latest. But so there's too much ambiguity there. And whether these small circles in here represent houses, we haven't really investigated this fully, but at least the magnetometer data does show us that there is something there worth ground truthing. And because there's so many other things going on here, we haven't really focused on that to any great degree. Okay, now this is a site that has everything. So going from one component to the next. This is the corner of the site where we get some early and middle woodland occupation. And what's here is a T0 terrace. So this is lower terrace. Everything up here on the surface here and over on the other side of the creek here is a Pleistocene terrace. So this is where we get the deep stratified early Archaic and Clovis material up here. Down here, this is much more recent terrace. This is probably no more than 2,000 to 3,000 years old. So here we have nothing on the surface. It's more prone to flooding. So everything we found here was buried more than a meter below surface for the most part. And that includes like the net pottery and your typical fishtail points, flint ridge material, which is common in the mound builder period. This is what we see in the early woodland components. So that extends from this corner of the Barton site here and over into the next site here. So I put this section of the magnetometer survey up here just to show you this anomaly here. So this is one of the biggest anomalies that was recorded on the site. So we put some test units in to see what was there. And that's the same area here. So this is right on the corner of the site. The creek runs through here, which is the southern edge of the site. These Jack's Reef points, which are middle woodland, have come from the surface up here. So close by. This is the buried early woodland component here, though. So what you're looking at here, and acknowledgement to Tim Horsley for giving us all the data, doing magnetometer survey out on the Barton site. This is the T0 terrace. So there's the anomaly there. And when we excavated down more than a meter, we found a burned surface over the whole area. Now, why is this body shared in the middle of this? This is middle woodland, thick, grid temperature, stratified above this. So this gave us initially the age for this burn feature here. We've just recently gotten some radiocarbon dates back, and they are about AD 400. So it's consistent with like a middle woodland occupation. So here's the big picture again. So what I was just talking about is down here in the corner of the site. But there's, you know, 30 acres, there's lots to investigate here. More than a lifetime of work in all of these patterns here to ground truth. Okay, let me spend the last few minutes talking about the B horizon components, and then I'll turn it over to Zach. So B horizon components meaning anything that isn't intrusive from the plow zone, like the pit features I just showed you. These are all intact occupations in the B horizon, all the way from late Archaic to Clovis. Now, this is your typical fire-cracked rock feature below the plow zone, upper B horizon, this with late Archaic points dates that feature. Now, we haven't found a lot of late archaic materials across the site, but we did in this one location. We do find scatters in the upper B horizon, which we assume are late archaic. And oftentimes you get the stage bifaces, which are from exploiting the Shriver-Chert outcrops just a few hundred meters away. So this is pretty much all components have some form of stage bifaces represented. Okay, now these are early archaic points from the surface. Now, these are from John Dominic's collection. This gave us a clue that there might be something buried here, and that's why we started investing the B horizon component to see how deep the site was and what was the earliest component represented, because we saw these all over the surface, not just on the Barton site, but on adjacent properties. So we thought there could be something there worth investigating. So we started excavating systematically. Every field school, every summer we do one of these 2-meter units. It started out with a 1x1, which wasn't really big enough to really get as far as we had to go. We typically spent 1 level per day. We're doing 10-centimeter levels down 20 levels to get to the Pleistocene riverbed. So that would take us anywhere from a month to 3 months, depending on how many screeners we had, because this is solid B horizon content. So we're talking about this area right here. Now this is the sum total. I'm just showing you how much we excavated that deep, because it's really labor intensive to go down 2 meters below the plow zone before you get to the Pleistocene riverbed. So we started out with this dinky little unit here, and we expanded from that because we couldn't see anything. So basically, when you're going that deep, you have to take it all the way down with a larger unit. So from that point on, we did contiguous 2-meter units, including these over here. So 49 square meters total. Excavating in 50-centimeter quads within the unit, so we could maximize the spatial control over what we were mapping in. So this is not quite a complete profile. You still have to go through the rest of the Clovis levels, but these are the earlier, what I talked about earlier, these intrusive woodland features here, and then you systematically go down 10-centimeter levels all the way to the Pleistocene surface. These are Clovis level features here. There's a hearth from the red stain you can barely see, but that's a burned area. We got radiocarbon samples from there. This is another firecracked rock feature from the Clovis level. So this is the complete profile. This is the Pleistocene riverbed with the cobble starting to show up. This profile is done by Dan Wagner. So he looked at the soil profile here and mapped out all these horizons here. So from top to bottom, we get everything from woodland here. We get late archaic just below the plow zone here, soapstone tempered ceramics. And then the predominant component we've encountered so far is early archaic and Clovis. Now, we haven't excavated extensively, but these are what we typically see in these excavations, these contiguous excavations. So just quickly show you a couple of maps of this. We have early archaic diagnostics, levels 11 to 12, associated with chipping clusters. A little bit more in terms of debitage than we see in the Clovis component, but not as neatly clustered. So once we get into the Clovis layers, we see this hearth I showed you earlier. We have tools, we have scrapers, stage bifaces being reduced, and a lot of debitage, including typical Paleoindian debitage like overshot flakes, like this one here. So this is level 16. So this is getting about in the middle of the Clovis level. We have some chipping clusters here, the hearth here, and these are just showing you some examples of what these things look like. This is the hearth close up. So no fire cracked rock, but a burned surface that has lots of charcoal and ribbons. And these are just some artifacts that I just wanted to show you. Serrated points associated with the early archaic levels. We do have some not bifurcates, but concave base points, which are probably some a variant of a middle to really archaic point here. And in the Clovis layer, we have pores, large scrapers. These fluted points are off the surface. So this is the only fluted point that's come off the surface of the site. It's in John Dominic's collection. These are overshot flakes here. This is an overshot flake that's back on the biface that it came from. So that's that fits on that particular stage biface. We have core overshot flakes. We have base end thinning flakes, including a channel flake here. And so everything but the Clovis point associated with this component here. And this is why they're here in the first place. So this is the Schreiber chert. And for some reason, in the earlier components, particularly in the Clovis levels, they tend to like the banded variety. It's not something you see across the whole site, but it seems to be particularly favorite of the Clovis peoples. So this big chunk of Schreiber chert was found in the Clovis levels. So I'll pass it over to Zach now.
Wonderful. Thanks, Bob. I will try to now share my screen if I can figure that out and hopefully do this quickly. Okay, cool.
Looks great, Zach.
You can see it?
Yep, looks great.
Perfect. Thank you. First, I just want to thank the Archaeological Conservancy for hosting this event, and thank you all for everyone who's watching live. I see over 260 people, which is really great to see the support from the archaeological community and people interested in archaeology. So I'm going to discuss our recent excavations at the Barton site from 2024 using the PaleoDigger, and also our geoarchaeological investigations that we happened at the same time. And that's this is a collaboration, of course, with Dr. Bob Wall, who just spoke, and Brian Fritz, the inventor of the PaleoDigger, and Dave Leslie and John Waugh, who are geoarchaeologists. But as Kelly mentioned in the beginning, I really got started with the Barton site in 2010 as an undergraduate at University of Maryland. I had an internship with Bob, helping to analyze and document the deeply buried artifacts from those deep test units. So in undergrad, that's what got me started and interested in Paleoindian studies. And flash forward, and we're back again in 2024, continuing this investigation of these deeply buried components at the Barton site. So again, 2024, the site well conserved by the Archaeological Conservancy, and with the support of Kelly Berliner and this archaeological team, we were able to organize this 1 week excavation with the PaleoDigger. There on the right, you can see Bob returning to help us find the datums and orient us to the site. Before I get into the paleo digging, I want to talk about the geoarchaeological investigations that we conducted in 2024. Dr. John Waugh did a bunch of hand augering to document this deep burial and stratigraphy at the site, to learn about site formation processes and how these different components might be preserved through time, and start to get some age estimates for the soil deposition at the site. And then building on that, Dr. Dave Leslie has organized and kind of pioneered this idea of terrestrial vibracoring, which I'll have a video up in a moment. Hopefully it'll work. But it's a way to get a continuous soil column to do further analyses on. So you can see the vibracore on the right, but in the center is a cut open vibracore. So it's a continuous collection of soil from the surface down as deep as you can get it, which at this site was somewhat difficult. We also conducted a ground penetrating radar survey running transects with a 200 megahertz antenna, which can see very deeply into the soil. We were able to document about 2 meters below surface using the GPR. And here you can see some of the conditions. We did this using a GPS to keep track of the transects. And our MHT summer intern, Katie Gill, as our person dragging the GPR through the agricultural fields. We took the transects of the GPR in coordination with the vibracores to use both the sediments as well as the radar reflections to study the soils. So transect 1, you can see we were able to get down again about 2 meters below surface before the signal gets lost. And we're seeing both evidence of the prior archaeology in where the blue arrows are showing some of Bob's older excavation units, and also probably seeing some preserved intact archaeological resources, like what looked to be post features noted in the red. Another transect further back on this terrace, we encountered what looks to be a paleo channel. You can see it outlined in red. So additional evidence for previous channels or rivers flowing through the site that would have both led to preservation as well as perhaps erosion of some portions of the archaeological site. So this GPR survey, we collected a handful of transects just to see kind of how to better document the landform. But it also shows there's great potential for additional ground penetrating radar surveys, perhaps in a gridded pattern to collect data that could be analyzed in 3 dimensions. So these are kind of 2-dimensional transects, but using a gridded technique, a 3-dimensional model of the landscape could be created, both documenting soils and site formation processes as well as archaeological features. The vibracore study, 7 vibracores were collected by Dr. Dave Leslie with help from many colleagues. 6 of those were in a row from closest to the Potomac and then kind of further back into the field. And we collected the seventh core near where Bob had found a paleosaw that dated to 18,000 years old. So we took a core there to study that paleosaw. And as I mentioned earlier, the vibracores in this site, getting the vibracores to go into the ground was difficult because of the hard packed silts. You can see a dejected Dr. Dave Leslie with a bent vibracore. Dave and I were having to use all of our weight on top of the vibracore to get it to go in the ground, but we made it work, and we were able to collect some full vibracore sediment columns that provided some really interesting results. So let's see if this works really quick just to show you. So that just kind of shows you the basics, but it's a lot of pushing. It's super saturating the soil with water, using this generator to vibrate the core as the steel as it goes into the ground, or aluminum as it goes into the ground, and then doing this over and over again to try to collect a full column. And then based on those columns, we cut them open and analyze them from top to bottom. We've collected some radiocarbon dates, which you can see in red here. They go from young at the top to very old at the bottom, encapsulating encapsulating the modern times into the late Pleistocene. And just an example of some of these high resolution photography of these vibracores, including one that's over 2 meters long. Additional analyses can and will be conducted on these vibracores, including X-ray fluorescence, and there's potential for other analyses like pollen analysis to learn even more about the site formation processes at Barton. Another fun portion of the vibracoring, as Bob illustrated in his presentation, was that there are many woodland features across and older features across Barton. And so a couple of the vibracores actually encountered some of these late woodland features while coring. And this allowed us to study those features in a very kind of limited way, but to collect radiocarbon dates, and now we know where additional features are for future analysis. And some of the artifacts that were collected in those small vibracores, there was fire-cracked rock, there was pre-contact Aboriginal ceramics, faunal remains, and lithics. And we got 2 radiocarbon dates from those features, both which suggest very nice woodland ages. And using those vibracores together, we're able to construct a fence diagram to study the soil formation and stratigraphy at Barton. And so this is a combination of analyzing the soils that were recovered from the cores, as well as contributions from the radiocarbon dating. So to start learning about the different kind of soil packages at the site and where artifacts might be preserved through time at different ages. And the other big portion of this excavation in 2024 was to get Brian Fritz and his PaleoDigger out to the Barton site. I originally saw Brian at a conference for the Eastern State Archaeological Federation present on the PaleoDigger, and after that presentation, I came up to him and said, "I know a perfect site where we can try to use this invention to document the site really well," and that was Barton, because of all of the work that Bob had done, and because of the Archaeological Conservancy preserving the site and supporting innovative research on the site. And so with a grant from Brian and his ArchaeologyX company, the PaleoDigger visited the site for a week. Brian has previously presented in great detail on his invention for a previous Archaeological Conservancy lecture. But just in general, for folks who haven't seen that, this is a powered bucket auger with a drill mast. It excavates 50-centimeter diameter holes, which is about a standard shovel test pit. It's able to excavate down 7 meters, and the excavation occurs in 10-centimeter levels, which is pretty standard for shovel test pitting. And the goal with the PaleoDigger, and particularly at Barton, was knowing, based on all of Bob's deep testing, knowing that there's deep stratigraphy and cultural stratification at the site, to dig these test pits at a regular interval to document the cultural occupations at Barton. And again, of course, my goal, which is probably was made clear based on my dissertation and the work I've been doing, was to try to learn more about this deeply buried Clovis occupation at the site. But we documented all of the occupations as we dug. And at Barton, we conducted this limited testing in 8-meter intervals. So let's see if this video works. So this is showing the PaleoDigger in action. So it's the bucket digging down, raising the bucket, kicking the bucket out, so then the soil is unloaded into a tub. That soil is then passed through a rotary screen, which is 1/4-inch mesh, to help kind of preliminarily get rid of the soil. But then there's still plenty of screening by members of the public, mostly the Archaeological Society of Maryland. And so that's kind of the basic way that the PaleoDigger works. Again, in 10-centimeter levels, moving a lot of dirt and being able to dig much deeper than is possible with a shovel by hand in a small area. And so I just had these slides just in case the video didn't work, but it seemed to have worked. There you can see the PaleoDigger and all of our volunteers from the Archaeological Society of Maryland. PaleoDigger coming up, kicking the bucket out, unloading the soil, throwing it into this rotary screen, and then again, plenty of labor, pushing hard silt through 1/4-inch mesh to find artifacts. And a special shout out to Kelly Berliner, who was out with us multiple days, working very hard, helping us screen all this soil and find artifacts. So there she is on the left. We excavated over the course of 5 days. We excavated 15 pits. 10 of the pits we were able to dig very deep. 5 were too compact to dig, or we encountered large woodland features at the base of the plow zone, which we left intact. So we didn't continue through those woodland features. But we got 10 deep holes that made it to the Pleistocene gravels. And here you can see an example from STP-6. In this STP at 170 centimeters below surface, we started getting lots of charcoal in the soils that we were screening. So I cleaned up the wall of this test pit and I circled it in red. There was a cultural feature. We collected some charcoal directly from the wall in that cultural feature, and we got 2 radiocarbon dates, which average out to anywhere from 9,700 to 10,000 calendar years before present. So it looks like an early Holocene feature at 170 centimeters below surface. And what's great about that is that we're getting artifacts even deeper than that. So that puts another age, which is likely terminal Pleistocene or Paleoindian in age for the more deeply buried artifacts deeper than that 180 centimeter feature. One of the things to note is that it is challenging to document the stratigraphy, the stratigraphic profiles using the PaleoDigger because it's so deep, but we worked very hard to document the stratigraphy, and Brian Fritz is actively tinkering and inventing different tools that will help to further refine the analysis of the wall profiles using the PaleoDigger. Here's another example. This test pit went down 3 meters below surface. Again, much beyond the capability of a hand shovel. And the only way to systematically test these deep alluvial sites all the way to the bottom without spending months digging large excavation units. All right, so what did we find? This was the most deeply buried artifact on the site. It looks to be a flake blank of Schreiber Chert. It's really deep, 280 to 290 centimeters below surface. Maybe that's due to some undulating topography associated with this Pleistocene occupation, late Pleistocene occupation. In STP5, which was close to where Bob Wall had done his large excavation blocks, where we know there's a Clovis occupation, we're finding flakes at 180 to 190 centimeters below surface. Of note, the flake on the lower right has a large pot lid fracture, so that is indicative of a hearth likely nearby. So it's because it's burned. In STP 23 at 200 to 2 meters below surface, we found an end scraper. STP 23, you'll see a map coming up, but it's in an area further away from where Bob had excavated. And so that is a small retouched or at least utilized distal end scraper. And here I have a photo just showing what a hafted end scraper might look like on the right, and showing the use in the center with the black outline, the dashed line. And these unifacial end scrapers are classic Paleoindian tool forms. Again, we're documenting all sorts of occupations at the site as the PaleoDigger digs in 10 centimeter levels. So in another test pit, STP 22 at 120 centimeters below surface, we recovered what looks to be a Brewerton point, Brewerton corner notched, which dates anywhere between 6,000 and 4,000 calendar years before present. So far, all of these objects have been looked to be made on the local Schreiber Chert. Deeper in STP 22 at 180 to 190 centimeters below surface, we got a utilized flake and 3 flakes of that banded style of Schreiber Chert, which, as Bob mentioned earlier, seems to have been particularly utilized and preferred in these early occupations, like the Clovis occupation that Bob has documented. So that's a pretty intriguing variety of the toolstone at the depth, at a similar depth to where Bob found Clovis occupation in his large excavation blocks. Additional flakes around 2 meters below surface, same test pit. And then, to me, the most exciting discovery is in one of these test pits, number 37, at 2 meters below surface. We recovered 7 flakes, 4 of which, the bottom row, looked to be the Schreiber Chert, and 3, the top row, looked to be some sort of chalcedony, a different tool stone. And finding 7 flakes in 110 centimeter level down 2 meters below surface, it is in again a 50 centimeter diameter test pit, is, I think, great evidence that this is an area of knapping or stone tool production, and that depth matches where Bob found his chipping clusters that look to be 13,000 years old. So I'm pretty excited that this might be another knapping area where people were making stone tools maybe 13,000 years ago. So this new area, you can see the cluster circled in red. We have artifacts, chipping debris mostly, as well as 2 scraping tools found around 2 meters below surface, which are likely Paleoindian in age. And this was an area that had not been subject to the deep test units where Bob had worked. This is an area that was found because of the innovative PaleoDigger being able to dig these deep test pits. So likely identified a new Paleoindian activity area at Barton. And just to kind of drive that home in this kind of cartoonish drawing, these campsites, people are doing different activities across the site. There are, and Bob mentioned this too, there are areas where people are camping, there are areas where people are using hards, scraping hides, making stone tools. There's all sorts of activity patterning and site use that the only way to study those sort of patterns in any meaningful way, especially when it's 6 feet below the surface, is through this PaleoDigger to sample systematically across the site. But it also now provides a great opportunity to go back and invest the amount of time and labor and energy to dig, like Bob said, a month to 3 months of time to get down deep enough in these large block excavations to document these early occupations at the site. Now that we know where a new activity area is located, we can be pretty confident that if we invest that energy and labor, we'll get something at the end. We will find a deeply buried occupation to study at the bottom. And as part of that, finding these intact artifacts that are likely 13,000 years old, we can do some really cool things. For instance, residue analysis, which was recently conducted in the Carolinas on stone tools, yielded evidence for proboscidean hunting. And so the tools that are well preserved 2 meters below surface at Barton have great potential to preserve residues on their used edges that would provide evidence for what these late Pleistocene people were eating at the Barton site, even with the lack of faunal preservation in those deep occupations. So that's just something really exciting that could be done because of how well preserved the Barton occupations are. And so with that, we are planning to return to Barton in 2025. Of course, this is going to be with a lot of coordination with Kelly, the Archaeological Conservancy, and all of our partners. But we are hoping and hopeful that we will return in 2025. And if you want to stay updated on a return, one place to do that is the Archaeological Society of Maryland's project page that they've created, where we have updates on the 2024 PaleoDigger excavations and where additional information will be provided for 2025. Also, this page was being used to raise funds to rent the skid steer that the PaleoDigger runs on, and you can see in the bottom right photo. But I'm happy to report that that fundraiser has raised the money necessary to bring the PaleoDigger back. So now any additional funds that are received will go to things like residue analysis, additional radiocarbon dating, and pollen analysis to study the environments, the well-preserved environments in those soil columns. And so with that, I'd like to again acknowledge and thank the Archaeological Conservancy for inviting Bob and I to participate in this event, and thank you all for your time and attention. Thanks.
Bob, Zach, thank you so much. Bob, I'm going to invite you to come back on with me. Kelly, if you want to join us, you're welcome to. We've got quite a few questions, and I'm going to guess that you're going to want to go into lots of detail with some of them. So here's my proposal. What I think I'd like to do is kind of go back and forth between the two of you so that we can get some questions from Bob and answered from Bob and some answered by Zach. And then with your permission, can I email you the rest of them so that we can get written answers to people?
Yeah, sure.
Fantastic. All right. So Bob, Peter wants to know, have you analyzed the copper artifacts for geochemistry as to possible origins of the materials?
For the Kaiser component, I sent them to Greg Latanzi at the New Jersey State Museum, and he determined sources. As far as the other ones, we assume with the Susquehannock component, we haven't done anything chemically with those, but we assume that they were probably European metal, but we haven't done any tests on that.
Okay, thanks. Zach, Donald is intrigued with the PaleoDigger and wants to know how do you guarantee that the artifacts aren't compromised by being damaged or destroyed by that digger going down?
So that's a great question. And I guess the first thing I would say is digging with a shovel could also impact artifacts. But digging with the PaleoDigger, we in the upper levels, like in the plow zone, we were getting out large pieces of pre-contact pottery, which is typically which is low fired and fragile, and they were not being broken by the PaleoDigger. There's a large hole at the bottom which collects the dirt, and so it from what I saw in the field, it did not do any more damage than a shovel would have done digging a hole, and maybe in fact less because of the way it's collecting. Rather than slamming down over and over again with a pointy shovel, it's more smoothly collecting dirt in a spinning motion.
Thank you. All right, Bob, Barbara Chatterjee wants to know a little bit about the bark lining in the storage pit that you were talking about. Were you able to analyze for type of bark that they used? Could any such bark provide preservative chemicals, such as we line closets with cedar to prevent moth infestation?
We have samples of it. Most of it looked like it was carbonized, but we haven't submitted any samples for analysis, but we did take a lot of samples, so we do have those.
That's some of that future study that you were talking about.
Exactly.
Zach, from Stewart, some years ago, of 14C date of calendar dating about 16,000 BP was reported with the suggestion that it might be dating a pre-Clovis component. How does that relate to the recent findings? Intrusive old charcoal or coal?
So that's something that Bob and I and the geoarchaeologists at the site have been discussing. And I think the soils look old enough to have soil formation that dates to 16,000 years ago. So it very well could be, the paleosoil that Bob found could very well be 16,000 years old. The question then is, are there artifacts associated with that age? And so far, it seems that the artifacts are Clovis age, 13,000 years old. But the Barton site would be, because of the great soil preservation, would be a site that has potential to yield evidence for something older than Clovis if it were to be there, or if it were to exist. So it's a great site because of the great preservation and has potential to yield those sort of contributions.
Thank you.
Can I add something to that real quick?
Absolutely.
When the first year we worked out there, we got this buried A, and it's like 200 meters away from where the Clovis area is that we worked on later. And we got 18 to 20,000 BP dates. Not associated with anything, but I was just dating the horizon. So anyway, when we went back with the PaleoDigger, I think they got some similar early dates in the same area. So I don't know what's going on with that area. Maybe it's an anomaly of some sort. But
Thanks. All right, I'm back to Bob from Taffy. How do the finds compare to objects of the same time period in other parts of the world?
well, same in terms of the Clovis material, it's consistent with Clovis everywhere else. So in terms of the early artifacts, I mean, it fits in with the typologies, early archaic, everything else. So, you know, it's consistent. There's nothing really unusual there.
Okay. Zach, Andrew is interested in the PaleoDigger. Again, we're getting a lot of interest in the PaleoDigger. And just as an aside, everybody, I will send you the link to the lecture that we did last fall with Brian so that you can learn a little bit more about the digger itself. But this one's for you, Zach. Does the torque and speed of the digger affect the stability of the walls of the test pit, making it more difficult to be able to recover artifacts from the digger's screen than if done by hand?
No, again, that's more of a soil question. And here the soil's so silty, the walls are very stable. So it didn't have any effect. There was very little wall fall, again, less than you'd expect even trying to dig with a shovel. But it's partially because the soils are so silty and compact at the site.
Okay. And then Bob, I'm going to toss one more your direction. We're about a minute away from 6. This one doesn't have a person behind it. It's just anonymous. I haven't heard late woodland sites called farmsteads before. What led you to identify them this way?
I call them farmsteads because we don't know whether, I mean, everybody talks about villages, and it's just kind of thinking outside the box. They could just be smaller units, smaller social units that repeatedly occupy the area over a long period of time. You look at the little palisades, maybe those are little villages, but maybe not. Maybe they just keep coming in larger, social units, but not enough to have a full village. So that's why I call them farmsteads.
All right. Thank you both. That was an awful lot of information in a very short amount of time. I know I kind of pinched you a little bit by giving you a time frame like that, but you did a great job. I will be following up with you because we do have more questions for folks to answer. So if you didn't get your question answered, I promise I'll get it to them. The recording should be posted at some point tomorrow, probably midday-ish, so watch for that. Next month on April 10th, we're going to be hearing about a preserve in Minnesota. So we're kind of picking up and going across the country. This one is about a prairie restoration project that's going on that is a really neat project. So I hope you'll join us for that one. So Zach, Bob, thank you very much for being here with us. Kelly, thank you very much for being my support on the back end and helping answer questions that way. And